Hello.
Hello. And welcome to our podcast. I'm Anna.
And I'm Lily.
And today we want to talk about Amy Chu's style of parenting and in general how she uses herself as an example for every strictly academically parent.
Because, as you'll see, she is a strictly academical parent.
And we are here to give a better understanding of these worldviews that she has that are very estranged from ours.
So, we were first introduced to Amy Chua in our English class. Just for a quick info, Amy Chua is the mother of 2 daughters and they live in America. She is the child of Chinese immigrants and her husband were professors of law at Yale University. And she wrote a book about her parenting style called The Battle Hymn of the Tiger Mom. And in our English class, we had a text excerpt in which, she just explained what makes children successful and disciplined. And to her, that answer is a strict measure of rules and practice in a very strict way, because according to her, the parents know better what is best for the children. Would you mind telling us your first thoughts that you had when first reading the text?
Yeah, for sure. For me, it was very shocking. She talks about how she forbids her daughters to attend sleepovers, have a play date or boyfriend. These are some very important aspects of childhood and youth for me. Also, they had to play an instrument, but we're only allowed to choose from the piano or the violin. And then they had to practice for up to 7 hours a day. And her children had appeared to have no say in what their personal interests are and couldn't follow them. And it made me wonder how they would ever be able to find themselves when only following their parents' wishes.
And what feelings did those words stir in you? Because I personally just had about as an extreme reaction as her style of parenting is.
Well, for me, at first, I felt bad because I compared it to the way my parents raised me. And it made it look like I wasn't raised at all. But then I became aware that there's another way of raising children that are still able to function in this competitive system and are able to follow and obey rules. Her parenting style seemed unnecessarily extreme to me. She made it clear that her children had to be perfect before receiving compliments and making their parents proud. In return, the Western parents, as she called them, are already happy with their children, just the way they are. And their kids don't have to practice until exhaustion for it. You said you had a mentally extreme reaction to it. How did that voice itself in your case?
Well, so I was raised very, very loosely, actually. I was raised much too softly, in my opinion. But still, her ways of parenting were so extreme that only after reading half a page, I was in a rage. I was almost too mad to continue reading. So I'm personally very sensitive, and all I could think about was how she was ruining her children's psyches for life. And I was quite loud about it and let it out. Because in my childhood, I was always allowed to do whatever I was interested in. I had always had to feel free in order to obey something. And the lack of freedom these girls were presented with in their lives seemed like the ultimate death to me. I could not imagine someone living a life like that. It's like no success in the world could ever make up for the harm that I think would be caused by that. But just perhaps, maybe it wouldn't be like this if just my whole philosophy of life would have been different from the start.
Yeah, maybe that is true. Because when I was researching, I found that a lot of people who were raised the Eastern way follow the philosophy that success will generate happiness and fun, whilst we tend to think that you first have to have fun in order to even get successful. Amy Chua herself has said so. It is important to understand that the Eastern way of raising children is not based on cruelty, but is a very traditional way of raising children that follows the Confucianism, a philosophy that says you have an obligation to obey.
That's interesting, because you've just named 2 things that Amy Chua said herself that I'd not been able to understand when first reading the text. First, the fact that her children weren't allowed to choose their own instruments and hobbies, and second, that the Asians are obliged to obey their parents.
Yeah, and that explains the discipline in the Eastern countries.
It's just the complete opposite to our ways, which is then again so hard to understand when you've never been exposed to it. So it isn't something that she made up, but is rather deeply embedded in belief, and that is seen as the right way. What really bothered me a lot when reading it the first time was that she said Chinese parents believe that and that of their children. And it made me so mad because she just assumed stuff of her children, whether it's true or not. But then I guess nobody can ever be sure. Like, we only assume stuff as well. So yeah, it's all a matter of perspective. And I don't think any loving mom would ever do something to her children that she would believe to be wrong.
Yeah, and also has to do with your surroundings, I think. If the society around you functions on happiness rather than success, you will be more likely to adapt to that way of living your life. Amy Chua was raised to be successful and must have mostly been surrounded by successful, hard-working people. So that was all she ever knew. But if she may have had a trusted family member, for example, that she looked up to, who had just a little bit of a different perspective, she might have done things a little different from the way she has done things in the end.
Absolutely, you always adapt to the things that you're exposed to. The things and people around you shape you. If we might have a strict relative whose view of success in life has made a good impression on us, we might have adapted to some of that as well. Just like I've only been briefly exposed to my dad's parenting, as I only saw him 3 times a week maybe, during my childhood. But this way of parenting always spoke to me more because I could see the way it shaped me in order to fit into society better. And I clearly could not see that with the parenting style of my mom. Still, nothing was ever based on success or money for us. But just in general, it was just based on a little bit of a guideline for you to have when entering the world of rules, you know?
Yes, I see, yeah. When people are young, they are all more or less the same. Of course, they are all individuals with different passions and tempers and so on. But what will influence their way of living will be the philosophy that was imposed into their brains. Okay. What Amy Chua might consider an easygoing, laid-back attitude could by some more southern cultures from Argentina, for example, be considered too stern about money and success. Now it's important to note that their way of raising children is a very strict one for the most part, that can also get physical just as the Eastern way of raising children, or even the way that the generations before us, like our grandparents, were raised. But that whole concept isn't based on pressuring the children into success, though.
But why is success so important to Amy Chua, and why was it so important to her parents, apart from the fact that Asian culture is mainly producing workhorses, and that's just the way of living there? And that's what they're used to. But, she's not living in that environment anymore. Again, she was taught that success will generate happiness. And since she never turned out to not be successful until a few years later, but we'll get to that, she doesn't know how happiness could be generated if success wasn't there. And also her parents came to seek a better life in the States, and that was just another motivation to excel and generate a successful life. It is what they came for. And they made their own American dream come true. So far for the different worldviews and how they could collide. Would you mind telling us about her parenting a little bit more, Anna?
Of course, Lily, yeah, I will. For her, it was very important for her children to achieve the goals that she had given to them. This included, as we said earlier, they weren't allowed to get grades worse than an A and had to be the #1 student in their class, except for sports and drama class. They also had to play an instrument, but no other than the piano or the violin, and their other hobbies were also chosen by their mom. They also were not allowed to attend sleepovers or play dates and be in a school place, and they could not watch TV or play computer games. To finish it all off, they were not permitted to complain about such conditions. That's a lot to get an understanding of. Let's start the beginning of what I just said, because there's already a lot that one could think badly about. So she picked out of her children's goals and hobbies, and they had to follow and achieve them. This may appear as an interference between the mother's wishes and visions and the development of the child. But you have to understand that part of the Eastern philosophy is that since the parents have more experience in life, they know what's the best for the children. That is also the case when Amy Chua decided what instruments her daughters were allowed to play.
And it also goes hand in hand with the whole aspect of first having to excel in something in order to have fun at it. Having fun is not the key factor in Eastern philosophy, and that is important to remember. Fun and happiness will be the result of hard work, which is, by the way, the purpose that playing an instrument serves in the raising of Amy Chua's children. To Amy, it was the perfect example for her daughters to see progress and the results of gaining happiness through hard work.
And I found out that when they had to work hard for school to achieve A grades, that was not just done to guarantee a good future for the children, but also to prepare them for the hard work that will await them when they are grown up. A lot of people who were raised the Western way have to adapt to the hard work of adulthood and face a lot of difficulties there. If one really has to pressure their children so much, just that they will have a good job and have played a few concert halls when it's not even their own motivation, and what consequences that can have on their mental health is something that we won't talk about just yet. But as Amy Chua said, whilst Western parents assume fragility of their child, the Eastern parents assume strength, which the Western parent underestimates.
I found now that after some research since reading the text for the first time, that most everything she did or made her children do had a pedagogical aspect to it as well. It wasn't just pure arbitrary as it seemed the first time. There was always a lesson to draw from or some preparation for life, no matter whether it was done rightfully or not. The intention behind it was a good one.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. One last point I would like to make is that when she made her children not attend playdates, sleepovers, or school dramas, that can be traced back to the fact that Asian families don't take care of relationships outside the family too much. Instead, there are loads of activities held within the family in response with the children.
And speaking of the children, let's speak about them.
Oh yeah, let's do that.
So, the children that we are concerning here in particular are Sophia and Louisa, who were 17 and 14 years of age when their mother's first book came out. Sophia played the piano, and so did Louisa at first, but soon she began to play the violin. And whilst things went mostly smoothly with Sophia, Louisa was a rebel against her mother from the age of 12, and her mom had to alter her parenting with Lulu and loosen up. Lulu then began to play tennis and dropped playing the violin the way she did before and decided to only continue it as a regular hobby. She was quoted saying on a family trip to Moscow, "I'm not what you want. I'm not Chinese. I don't want to be Chinese. Why can't you get that through your head? I hate the violin. I hate my life. I hate you and I hate this family." Unquote. She also stood outside the cold at 3 years of age after a fight over playing the piano, refusing to come in. So she didn't quite agree with the harsh whereabouts of her mother. Today, Lulu and Sophia are standing well on their own feet. Lulu has a graduate law degree at Harvard and is now in the US Army. Louisa studied art history and is now a professor of law, as far as I could find out. Sophia described her childhood as happy, and she noted that she was never afraid of her mom, but was rather afraid of disappointing her dad. But she says it was always clear to her that her parents were always confident that their children could come far. But Lulu sees it about the same way, saying her childhood was a tough but a happy one. Despite being a rebel to her mom, she wants to become a tiger mom as well, as she saw that her mother's preparation gave her the right tools to drive her own confidence and not end up suffering from imposter syndrome at Harvard like a lot of others did. She says she feels very normal and has a lot of friends and socializing going on now. Since going to college, her parents have completely withdrawn from her academical whereabouts and seem to have confidentially resigned from the jobs as parents, though the connection between the parents and their daughters remain a close one.
Yeah, so it seemed that both girls turned out just fine and even stepped into their parents' shoes.
Yes, good for them! With so many people prophesying otherwise, they must have done something right with their children. Something that can't be conveyed on paper. Perhaps as love? I don't know.
Yeah, who knows? But where do the worries come from then? And what about the cases where people don't feel alright about their upbringing by a tiger mom?
Yes, what about them, Anna?
Yes, so I have read that Amy Chua had received a lot of backlash about her parenting techniques, and some were said to have said that they lived through a PTSD or flashbacks from their own strict upbringing. The thing is, Amy truly demanded perfection of her children in a lot of ways. And if her expectations weren't fulfilled, her children were, in her words, punished and shamed because it was believed that the children would be strong enough to take the shame and improve from it. But this can also cause trauma, especially when you are always being taught that you are not good enough until you are academically perfect. If you expect yourself to succeed in everything you possibly, unrealistic expectations will be disappointing. Striving to be perfect can lead to depression, anxiety, or eating disorders. The goal is to not set your expectations too high so that the feeling of success can be felt. This was the aim of Amy Truer of her daughters. To be perfect is also an inhuman state, and in order to excel in every aspect, you have to give up at least a bit of your human side. The first of it being emotions, because they don't necessarily agree with the rationality that work requires. And this kind of success is based on materialistic and superficial measures, such as money and status, and don't really reflect on real human values. With the Western parenting, you see a lot of the parents respect the child and its decisions for what it is and not for what it isn't. It is much more unconditional than Eastern parenting. At least that's what the child could indirectly take from it.
Right. A little fun fact, 70% of Western parents believe that school pressure harms their children, whilst Eastern parents simply say that a failure in school is a failure of the parents. But all jokes aside, school stress is generally a very big factor for a lot of kids. Around 33% of children claim that their biggest stress in their lives is school pressure. The pressure is based on fear of failure or on social aspects as to how people view you or whether your grades permit you to remain in your social field. This can also reach much further than just anger, sadness, or disagreements with your parents, as it can reach diverse symptoms of depression, burnout, and can also affect physical health.
It is also possible that things that your child usually knows can be lost without a trace when pressure is coming up. This phenomenon is called echoing. Also, it is not recommended to pressure the child to catch up with previous unachieved goals because it reminds the child of its failures of the past rather than looking into the future where it can still do better.
I can only tell you that I'm much too familiar with that. But of course, this doesn't have to apply to every child.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So, with all of that being said, I'm wondering whether it is correct to put young people up with this much pressure. Like, do we really need the system of validation where some can officially be deemed as a failure?
Well, that is more a philosophical question because this whole concept of validation is very natural to the human being. When achieving validation, the brain gets stimulated to gain pleasure with the situation. Humans classically want to be the best at things, but when the system takes up too much value that isn't true to the person, then it can lead to burnout or depression by lack of self-fulfillment.
That's when the perspective is lost as to why one does the things they do.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Okay, so it is important to take into consideration what you like and what you don't.
Yeah.
Okay, so success isn't the recipe to happiness then?
Not at all, but in return it has been proven that people with a more positive mindset turn out to be more successful and can hold their happiness much longer.
Now, that puts the Western way of parenting in a very good light, but what makes Eastern people still hold their own truth then? Of course, they have to have a point to make as well. One that directly connects to the points that we just named was that the Western way of parenting dwells way too much on failure rather than overcoming it and feeling the happiness of achieving something that first seemed unthinkable, which can deem negative for the child's psyche as well, which is very contrasting to the usual concern about mental health of the Western parents. In general, Western parents are said to take the easier, more simple way, and I must admit, that's true.
Yes, we would never sacrifice that much just for the education for our children.
No, that's way too much work. I don't want to put up with conflicts and even more work after my own work when it doesn't seem necessary to me. Like, I couldn't be bothered. Not everyone has to excel academically.
Yeah, success is a very individual thing, I think.
Yes, I agree. But for the people who put academic performance into their focus, that is a very reasonable point to make. Also, the Easterners think it's sad for the Westerners to underestimate their children's potential and strength to overcome burdens. Again, they make the point of assuming strength whilst we expect the children to be fragile, which is a whole topic for itself, so we won't dig into that. But it is also said that the whole concept of self-fulfillment that us Westerners follow is what makes a child fragile in the first place.
That also overlaps with a quote from Amy Chua, if I may interrupt.
Sure.
So she had made this point about how she was criticized for not letting her children have the opportunity to reach self-fulfillment, whilst the reality for the children who are given the freedom of the so sad self-realization is to stick around social media all day long.
Seems to be a very legit point of view, though I wouldn't drill my kids in return for it as well.
No, I wouldn't do.
But the Easterners have made one last point that I really found to be a winner. Eastern children aren't necessarily less happy than the Western ones. That's one to stick around in your head and that we'd like to close this discussion with. Amy Chua has, since the publishing of her book in 2011, faced some very drastic changes in her life. Back then, both she and her husband were professors of law at Yale University, but by now they've both been expelled from teaching there due to reasons that aren't really a concern of our podcast. But she has since rethought her own values and has come to the conclusion that, quote, what really matters is to be happy and close as a family. I see young parents stressed about their children's exams or tennis matches and find myself saying, I can't believe it's coming out of my mouth. It's not as important as you think, unquote.
And with this unexpected change of hearts and a new view on a parenting style that seemed impossible to us, we would like to say, be kind to your children and treat them with love from within. And it's all a question of balance. And we would like to ask you, what values are most important in this modern age? And what is really important?
Thank you so much for listening to our podcast. I hope we created a chance to learn and gain new perspectives. And with that, I think we have everything set for now, and we will resign now.
Yeah, and thank you so much for your attention.
Yes, okay, bye!